We're looking for a new treasurer for the local search and rescue station.
What's it pay?
It's a volunteer job.
It'll help your resume.
I've got
my resume.
I've got 4 great big tote boxes of binders of bookkeeping stuff.
Well, it can't be too much work.
Want to bet? For me, it is. QuickBooks right now is not my favorite flavor.
Okay, I see 3 o'clock, and Councilor Diandrad sent me a note shortly before 3 saying that she would not be able to attend today. So we are waiting. I'm just going to open up my view here to full screen and see if there she is. Yes, you are there too. Good. So Councilor Ladwig is there. So it will just be the 4 of us, and we're all here. And Corporate Officer, are we ready to proceed?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it's live on YouTube.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Special Committee of the Whole meeting for January 26, 21, held electronically as per the Ministerial Order number M192. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are fortunate to be able to gather on the territory of the Squamish Nation. I will call the meeting to order. There is an agenda. I'll call for approval of the agenda firstly. Councillor Crowell, thank you. Councillor Lumley, all in favor of approval? Thank you. I'd like to also request a recommendation to receive all presentations, reports, and plans on the agenda. Councillor Crowell, thank you. And Councillor Ladwig, thank you. So receipt of all of those. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. So everybody else can go home now. We just need to hear from the Director of Finance. I think you're going to be talking all afternoon there, Director.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
For this first presentation, I'm going to share my screen and let me know when you can see that. Just a moment.
Yep, got it.
Great, okay, good. All right, so the first item is the Water and Sanitary Sewer Long-Term Financial Plan updates. And previously, last year, Council's been familiar with this, so I'm going to provide a bit of an abridged version this year. We'll start with the Water Long-Term Financial Plan. And so if you remember, the goal for our long-term financial plans is to achieve self-sustaining funds with sufficient reserves to address short and long-term operational and capital requirements. And so we have 3 reserves and we have targets for each of them. So the operational reserve with a contingency, we aim for 30% of annual O&M expenses. And that's really a buffer for unexpected costs such as emergency breakdowns. The rate stabilization is aiming for 10% of annual parcel taxes and user fees. And that's a buffer for water user revenue declines because we meter water. There's a bit of variability sometimes in that revenue. So we have a bit of a buffer for that. And then the third reserve is a capital reserve, and we're aiming for 3% of total asset replacement value. And this is the one that would allow us to fund our future asset renewal and replacement instead of relying on grant or debt funding. So for this plan update this year, the operational costs are based on the 2021 preliminary budget, which I'll be presenting to you next in the agenda. The capital, we're basing the first 5 years on the 5-year capital projects that Dave Newman will be presenting later in the meeting. And then from then onward, we use what we call annual cost for asset replacement. And that is calculated to be on a 100-year average, about $640,000 per year. Now this is up from our previous number of $600,000, and that reflects, we recently did an asset inventory update and some unit cost updates. So that 100-year average has bumped up a little bit, and that does affect the long-term plan somewhat. So you're probably familiar with this graph from last year, and this is just to remind you, it's a lot of busyness, but there's basically 4 parts. The vertical bars are revenue. This pink one, you can see that's the debt revenue associated with zone 3. The blue horizontal is operating costs. On top of that, we layer the green horizontal, which is the capital costs. And then these small two blue and slightly other blue is the debt servicing. And so we have the two targets that I had mentioned. There's the operational reserve target, which includes the rate stabilization. That's this orange dotted line across the bottom here. And then this black dotted line is basically our reserve targets, including capital. So it's higher because, of course, it's a higher number for capital. And the key item that we look at is this black line here, and that is our cash position. And you can see I'm really happy that we now have it consistently above our operational reserve. I mean, it's just squeaking above, but it's above. Previously, we struggled to get that above the line. And we're aiming for it to be coming above this black dotted line, which means, so here's our target, which means we will have enough cash on hand to each year to fund the annual requirements for capital and still have a buffer for operation fluctuations that we see. And so in this context, there's no change from last year. So in order to have this target met, we want to continue with the 5% annual rate increases. So for the next 5 years, 21 to 2026. And so a continuation of the long-term plan we've had for quite a few years now. And again, with the goal of getting to this reserve target here. That we do, because of that change from 600 asset replacement per year to 640,000 a year, what's happening is this target is being delayed. You can see it's now about just after 2034. Previously, we had met it in 2030. So the only way to make that cross those lines earlier is to make this annual rate increase higher. But, being really conscious that we want to ease in these rate increases and want to make sure it's affordable for people. So we don't want to hit, an abrupt increase, is why it's a gradual but consistent increase along the way. So as much as I would like to get that line crossed sooner, we have to, I recommend that we balance it out with a, reasonable rate increase. And that 5%, so let me see. Yeah, so no extension to the years that we're going to be proposing we increase. And again, the goal is for the long-term sustainability. So for 2021, proposing a 5% rate increase on parcel taxes and user fees. And that 5%, 2% is cost of living. So just, basic costs that come up regardless of what's going on, is inflation. And then 3% is to build that long-term reserve. And again, continue with the overall annual rate increase until 2026, until those targets are met. And to give you an idea of what that would cost from a dollars perspective, water is tricky because different properties have different costs. Commercial have fixed costs for the meters. We also have a base cost for residential. And of course, there's the water use, which is a big variable. But if I take in sort of sample residential single family house that uses about 350 cubic meters of water per year, the increase overall would be just over $40 annually for the increase above what they are already paying. So, overall quite reasonable. Hopefully it's felt that way, just trying to keep that manageable for people. And so at this point, I'll open it up for questions before I move on to sanitary sewer, if anyone has any questions now.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Ladwig? I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for this report. So sorry, I just want to make sure I understand this graph. So it's 5% increase until 2026, and then what happens after 2026?
After that, it's going to be there's a few things that happen in between. It depends. It's quite impacting on our annual cost of what we spend. But once we get past that target, then we level off, and it could be a really modest increase, either the 2% for cost of living or even potentially lower, depending how much room we have in there. Yeah, so it's looking good. It just it's going to take a few more years to get there. Yeah, but then it's going to level off quite nicely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? I have one for the director, and that is the 2% cost of living. We call it that, but in the true sense, is there another word, another phrase to give it, in terms of, if you go online and look at the cost of living index for the province, this past year, for example, is not 2%. but we still want to recover that 2%. And I just wonder if there's another way we should be phrasing that so that people look at that and say, well, cost of living was actually 0.08% this year. How come we're charging 2%? And it may be that we want to call it something else. We could call it inflation increase or cost increase, stabilization increase, including cost of living, something of that. I don't know if that would work. So.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, that's a really good point. And the cost of living on average over the years, it's been roughly 2%. Of course, it goes up and down every year. And it really does intend to reflect inflation. And although it does fluctuate each year, overall, we're aiming for an average. Previously, that 2% also was trying to get us up to the operational reserve. But I think, like you suggested, inflation increase is probably a better terminology, and it's a long-term average as opposed to, matching each specific year.
Well, exactly, because next year, I mean, if you came in next year, if the cost of living, for example, was up at 2.5% one year, would we increase it to 2.5%, or would we keep it at 2%?
Yeah, I keep it at 2 because it's a 100-year plan. So don't want to tweak it too much each year. It's looking long term. So, and this will, this goes out for, overall 100 years. So.
And maybe we just say cost of living bracket long-term average. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Something that just takes away the kind of the pickiness of somebody saying, well, cost of living was only 0.08%. Why are we charging 2%?
Yeah.
It's not a lot of money in the long term, but it is it's the accuracy of the statement.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Other comments? Okay, hearing none, thank you. We'll move on to sanitary.
Okay, so sanitary, we follow the same process as water, so really similar. There are a few slight differences. So again, same goals, long-term sustainability with short and long-term reserves. So reserve targets, there's a bit of a slight change here. So operational reserves, no change, 30% of O&M expenses. The rate stabilization in this context is only 5% of the annual parcel taxes and user fees. And that's because with sanitary sewer, we bill on a flat rate basis. So not so much variability like there would be with water because it's not based on use at this point anyway. And then the capital reserve is also for 3% for sanitary sewer. And again, same logic in terms of where, we always reset every year the operations budget to take into account the most recent projections we have. So it's going to be based on a 2021 preliminary ops budget, which I'll be presenting later in the meeting. And then capital, again, the first 5 years is based on a report Dave New will be providing. And then for sanitary sewer, on the long-term annual cost of replacement, it's quite significant. So the 100-year average is now $950,000 per year. Previously, it was about $785,000. And again, this $950,000 reflects updated asset inventory and unit costs. And we have a lot of sanitary infrastructure. So that's a pretty significant change this year. And I'll show you how that affects the long-term plan. So same graph, same idea. Vertical means revenues, horizontal blues, operations, horizontal green is capital. You can see this big mountain here. That's the lift station and treatment plant projects that we're just finishing up. And then so here, operation reserve target, capital target. So the annual increases, there's no significant change here. Last year, the 5% was projected through 2029. So I've tacked on one more year to that. The real effect is this reserve target date. So now it's out to 2036. And previously that was 2030. So just makes us a bit more vulnerable for a bit longer. But again, keeping in mind, we want to ease any rate increases gradually, and we've been doing it for several years. We want to be conscious of not making it too difficult for people every year. So for the sanitary, it's going to be the same recommendation as we have for water. Again, 5% for 2021, and then overall increases of 5% through to 2030 or until reserve targets met. And again, we update these plans every year, and we take into account changes, either increase or decreased costs. Like with the water fund, we have decreased or change from the zone 3 sourcing. So we have a look every year. So this is a projection, but we do update it every year. So, and from a dollar point of view for sanitary sewer, again, it fluctuates depending on what type of property, if, commercial versus residential, and residential if you have a suite or not. So a single family house with no suite, the annual increase of total would be of just over $30, about $32. And that would be the impact of the 5%. So I can take any questions about sanitary if you have any.
Thank you. Council, over to you. I'm not seeing any questions. Everybody understands this, and this has become kind of an annual event for us, so we understand the objective and where we're going. So thank you for that update.
Okay.
Sorry, Councilor Kroll has his hand up. Yeah.
Oh. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, having sat in this sort of reporting when I was acting as a director on the regional district, I really want to commend staff for being so proactive and, keeping, on top of things and just keeping the budget process working, in everyone's favor, because when I look, it really was like an orchestra of scorched cats when the regional district was faced with doing a catch up, which hopefully, with what you're doing is keeping us on top of things. So I just want to really applaud and commend staff for, working in such a proactive manner.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we all agree with that. That it saves a lot of challenges in the long term to be able to approach it this way. But we also have to bear in mind that at a certain point in time, our costs are covered and we are into a maintenance state budget.
Great. Yes, thank you very much. And I have to, also give kudos back, because current council and previous councils have been very supportive of implementing these rate increases over the years. It's been and these are long, multi-year efforts, and it really takes a sustained effort. So we staff really appreciate the support we get from council, because it does make our jobs easier, and it's appreciate the recognition that we do need those additional funds.
Okay, we can move on to the next report, we'll. Yeah, I don't see any questions arising there, so thank you. Preliminary water operating budget.
Yes, okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the purpose of this report is to present the 2021 preliminary operating budget for council's review. And the significant change this year from prior year budgets is the switch from supplying zone 3 with aquifer water. And this has been reflected in the preliminary budget that I'm presenting today. And let's see, I'm having a bit of a technical challenge on this end, so bear with me. So the revenue that we've got projected is just over $1.8 million. And this is an overall increase of about $25,000 as compared to last year. This reflects the 5% rate increase that we just talked about. And also it reflects an adjustment in consumption. We're seeing a bit of variability in terms of water consumption as the pandemic affects owners' activities, but that's really what that rate stabilization fund is for. So no concerns there, just did reflect it in the budget somewhat. So from an expense point of view, total expenses are budgeted to be just over $1.4 million. And this is an overall decrease of about $221,000 as compared to last year. And that decrease is primarily the result of reduced transfers to reserves. I don't know if you remember last year, we did a significant transfers to reserves to get that operating reserve target met. And so that's why the decrease for this year. I do want to highlight a couple items. New this year is the Align for Water Governance, and this is in recognition of the importance of the regional water strategy that council and staff have been working on, and $20,000 has been added to the operation budget to support that work. Wells and reservoirs, we are reflecting the change in the SCRD bulk water purchases that we do. Last year's budget, we budgeted $200,000 for purchases, which was a reduced amount from the year before. This year, we're budgeting about $58,000, and that's an estimate based on the information we have right now. So that's a nice reduction in the expenses. And also from a transmission distribution point of view, we are going to be seeing some increased electricity costs now that we're servicing Zone 3. So we've added some increased costs there, as also a bit of materials and supplies as well. And this is really reflecting the additional costs required to service Zone 3 with the Aquifer water. Regarding the fiscal services, so the capital transfer to capital reserve. So this budget has about $159,000 transferring over to capital, and really this represents the remaining funding that's being collected this year that isn't required for the current year's capital plan. So overall, there is a surplus of $382,000 that's being budgeted, and I'd say surplus, but that really is being used to fund the current year capital and projects program, and that's just the taxation portion of the program. Doesn't by any means cover all of the costs in that program. So from a recommendation and next steps point of view, it's recommended or requested that council support the revenue rate increases that's being proposed, and in a draft motion will be brought to formalize that on the late council meeting in late February. And then based on the direction given at that time, staff will bring the amended rates, fees, and charges bylaw to the March 2nd council meeting for 3 readings, and then with adoption scheduled for March 16th. And this will ensure that the new rates are brought in place prior to the start of the next utility billing cycle. And we have a deadline for that. We have to get those rate increases approved in bylaw before we do our next cycle, just from an administration point of view. Otherwise, we can't charge them at that time. The parcel tax, though, it comes along with the other tax rate bylaws. There's a bit of a disconnect between those two things, but both of them will be ideally having a 5% rate increase reflected. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Dave Newman and Daniel Tardif are also on the line in case you have some specific items about operations in the water fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to council. Any questions on this report? Okay, seeing none, I have a couple of clarifications I'd like, and possibly for Dave or Daniel. And on page 2 of 7 or 18 of our agenda, we talk about the well number 6 Ocean Mount with approximately 1,900 cubic meters a day future capacity. When do we anticipate that might come online, and what would we be cutting out from the other wells? Would we be or throttling back in the other wells? What would happen there?
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. So the design for the well 6 is nearing completion, and what we're waiting for at this point is for the thumbs up from the ministry to allow us to commission the well, and at that point we will connect to our system. We are not in need at this point for that additional capacity as far as meeting daily demands, but one of the things that it does help us with is that we end up with redundancy in our system, so that if we have a well go down, we don't need, like a pump failure or something like that, we wouldn't have to go into watering restrictions to make sure that we can meet the demand of the town. And we are always looking at the water levels in the various wells to determine how best to run them. And once we get well 6 online, we'll be doing kind of an audit of how our wells run. And right now, Waterline and Urban Systems have both been working with us as to the best way to be running the wells. And that's another thing that our annual monitoring does, is that it looks at our the aquifer levels and the influences on other wells, and determines and recommends how best to run those wells for the health of the aquifer as well as the infrastructure.
Councillor Lumley.
I just, the bulk water facilities charges that we still pay, like we're still paying a little bit, or I knew we used to pay what, about 375,000 a year, I think, for bulk water from SCRD. Is there any idea, like, I know you're keeping it on for the fire flow, we always knew that. And it says peak demand as well. Do we know what those charges were this year, like for 2020, or?
Director of Finance.
One of those graphs, but I'm just curious.
Yes, thanks for the question on that. So previously we reached about $300,000 per year was our top up for our charges for bulk water. The 2020 we budgeted 200, but we're actually more like 250. We're reflecting their rate increases that they have put in. The budget going forward, the 58, it's a combo. Part of it is the fire flow and the peak demand. There's also, we're being really conservative with this estimate, because we've also added in a flat charge for a base fee, because we haven't renegotiated the new bulk water under the zone 3 conditions. And so we're really not sure if there's going to be a flat component, like a lot of fees have, a variable and flat component. So we've been quite conservative in putting that in there. Ideally, that's going to go down. We just didn't want to be too optimistic on that one. And I don't, as far as I know, we're not able to, this is more a question for Director of Infrastructure. I don't know we're able to distinguish volume for fire flow or peak demand, but we also have to keep in mind that we have to have enough in case we do have a significant fire that we need the fire flow for. So Dave, do you have anything to add on that?
Yep. So yes, we do rely on the regional district to a degree for fire flow, and obviously that is going to be dependent on how often we have fires. And we're going to be working on being able to track that a little bit more granularly, so that, if we see a bill come in that's fairly high, that we'll be able to say, okay, yes, it was that day, and yes, this is what was happening. And the peak hour demand, we are not needing to take advantage of that at this point, because our current well capacity and pumps will take care of that. However, when our population reaches a certain point, we'll no longer be able to cover our peak demand. And I believe it's conservative. We were looking at, I think, another 15 years before we were going to need to be relying on the regional district for peak hour.
Thank you.
I mean, I just asked that question obviously because when we made time to review the budget to supply zone 3, a large part of that was being the fact that we wouldn't have to buy water from the SCRD anymore. So, I mean, I guess maybe in the next few years, that's going to drop quite substantially. Like, so if it was 300 before we supplied the water, now we're supplying them water and it only went to 250. It just doesn't seem like a major drop, which was to finance the drilling of the well. But anyway, that's why I just asked.
If I can clarify that, Mr. Mayor. So previously the amount highest we did was 200 or 300. This year, 2020, I'm still kind of straddling both years right now. 2020 was about 250, but we were still on zone 3 through July. And then we also had an unexpected rate increase from the RD, which also is reflected in that. And so now we're down, like we're aiming for 58,000 roughly for 2021. And any costs that we don't incur will just end up going and help us build our reserves that much quicker. So they definitely won't go to waste. It would just be, trying to be really conservative there. And we're hoping, especially after this first year, we'll have a much better sense, a full year on supplying zone 3 with aquifer water. where those costs land, and then next year's budget will be able to even fine tune it even more. Mhm.
Thank you. Councillor Kroll?
I guess this would be for Director Newman. Once well 6 is into the stream, would it take some of the pressure off regional district, us buying from the regional district in the event of peak periods or fire, or are we still going to have that dependency with them?
We'll still have the dependency for fire flow, and by the time we are reliant on them in give or take, 15 years at this point, away before we're reliant on them for peak hour, we'll be needing that well for daily demand. And so I don't see that really changing either of those significantly.
Thank you. A question I have is on the same page, and that's the 1,700 metered service connections. Do we have just comment from one of the directors of the regional district as to how great it is for her to be able to go online and see her water usage, as it goes, and I assume that's a smart meter. And do we have that kind of meter and that kind of capability to be able to go on and take a look and see per household what we're actually doing, using for water? Anybody?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the utility bills, at this point, the short answer is no. Some of our meters definitely have the more daily information. Not all of them do. We have some older meters that are touchpad that isn't an option. The utility bill, we do reflect the seasonal use on each one, and that's in paper form. And so at least the owners get that each bill, they can get their current 6 months and then the previous season 6 months as a comparison. We have been looking on finance to provide the utility bills and taxation through an online option that for various reasons, it's been quite challenging to have put that in place. We're still looking at it, but at this point, as far as I know, we aren't there yet from a capacity from all the meters. It would only be part of them that could do that. And we don't have the infrastructure in place to do it yet.
Yeah, I asked that question because I know that previously the house that I was in had a significant bill because of a leak. And now that I'm there, I'd like to know if that leak has been fully corrected. And is there a way that I can, and I know that the meter was read recently, as much as 3 weeks ago, I guess. And is there a way I can find that out as to how I'm doing with the current water?
Yes, so we read, although we bill every 6 months, we read meters every 3 months. That's our staffing resource level. That's our level of service we're able to provide for that. If we could read more frequently, we would, but we don't have the staffing capacity for that. So we do read every 3 months, and then finance staff reviews, and in conjunction with infrastructure services staff, and we follow up when we can notice a really significant use or unusual use for a property. It could be a legitimate use, it could be a leak, but we do try and give you a heads up. But at any point, an owner can give us a call or let us know. We can have a look and see where your most recent consumption was over that last 3 months, and definitely let you know. So
I will do that. That might be something we should publicize to people, because there are people who occasionally get caught, as we know, in terms of a problem with it, or they like to ensure that a problem they have had has been corrected and be able to check on that.
Yeah. Like I said, we do follow up. We do a review of all the readings, the ones that we receive every 3 months, and we highlight any sort of unusual use as compared to the previous season. What is challenging to catch is if someone is a low user and they have a slight leak that could be significant to them, but from on our end, it seems nothing major. We won't catch things like that because it's such a difference. Each individual household is so different, but people can definitely give us a call and we can chat with what we know. Mm-hmm.
Okay, councillors, is there anything else on this report? Okay, hearing nothing, there's a lot of information there. I'm glad that we all took it in and understood it all. We'll go on to the next report, and that's the, just moving over, turning pages here. And that's the staff report on the 2021 preliminary sewer operating budget. And back again to the Director of Finance.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So this one, very similar process to the water fund. So the revenue that we're budgeting this year is just over $2 million for sewer operations. This is an overall increase of about $290,000 as compared to last year. The majority of that increase is being attributed from transfers from reserves, which is a funding source. The revenue does reflect the parcel taxes, and the user fee does reflect the recommended 5% rate increase as we're recommending through the long-term financial plan process. From an expense, let me take a look and see again. I'm having a bit of technical challenge on this end. From a transfer to reserve, so just to explain that a little bit. So the transfer to reserves is, you'll see in there, is just over $200,000. And really, last year was a pretty challenging year in terms of adjusting operations to reflect the restrictions required to the pandemic. And we were definitely able to maintain the essential services. Our crews and staff did an incredible job there. Certain preventative activities were delayed, though, just as a course of having to adjust and being in unusual conditions. So unspent money that was set aside this year for projects that weren't able to be done have been carried forward and now are being brought back into reserves in 2021. So that's what that's all about. We also have a second transfer from reserves, which is new. And this is transfer from, we collect from developers a fee called excess services, and that relates to the work that we had done and paid for the lift station. And so this year I'm able to transfer just over $87,000 from that pot of money, and that covers the debt servicing for the Prost Road lift station debt, which is, it's a great addition of a funding source. And then I've also got another transfer from reserves, and this is just over $24,000, and this is specific to the COVID restart grant. And it is covering COVID related expenses that are occurring in sanitary sewer, and that is cleaning, PPE, and also we have a pump rental cost that is impact. We had a project, and because of COVID, supplies were delayed, the whole construction project was delayed, and we had to rent this pump for quite a few months, and that is being covered by the COVID money because that was not expected, and the only reason we had it was because of the delays that came about as COVID sort of affected all of our operations. So from an expense point of view, operating expenses are budgeted to be just about $1.9 million, and that's an increase of about $400,000 as compared to last year. And again, a good chunk of this relates to this is the expense side of the projects that weren't covered last year, but there's a counter funding for that as well. So from a, from a staff sanitary collection point of view, we've increased staffing allocations in this area to reflect the additional work that's planned for this year. And that's part of the delay from last year. We've also got the same effect in the sewer main and flushing and smoke testing area. And so due to the pandemic, we weren't able to complete the 2020 flushing and smoke testing program. So we're carrying over $94,000, and these are the associated expenses that come with that. And hopefully be able to do the 2020 and 2020 programs in this one year. At the treatment plant, we've also increased the staffing allocation for that area to reflect the additional resources required to run the plant and the outstations effectively. And we're also looking at putting some funding towards SCADA. We have additional funds allocated for operator support and SCADA maintenance. Again, all really quite essential areas. Under fiscal services, again, I mentioned two transfers to reserves. One is the excess services. So whatever we collect in the current year for the excess service charge that we charge developers, I transfer the exact matching amount to the reserve. So if I budgeted 20 in revenue and 20 in the expense side, if we collect 50, I'll just match it by the expense. So it's really in and out. And then I've also got the about 68,000 transferring to the capital reserve, which as we're trying to build that up. And that is really the excess money that taxation money that we're not going to be using to fund the capital this year. So the budget is set up to generate a surplus of $90,000 taxation funding that can be used for the capital taxation portion of the current year capital program that the Director of Infrastructure Services is going to talk about shortly. And again, next steps in this one is exact same timing with water. Bring back a formal recommendation to council to pass the approval for the 5% rate increases. And again, the rates, fees, and charges bylaw adopted by the end of March in order to have those fees in place. And then the tax rate bylaw for sewer would come in with the rest of the tax rate bylaws. So if you have any questions, and again, David and Daniel are here to answer wastewater related questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I'll go to council. Do you have any questions on this report? Seeing none, I just, if I could ask a couple myself, the status of the Prouse Road lift station, is that now, I mean, there appears to be temporary equipment sitting by and excess equipment on the top of the ground there. Is that project now completed? And I haven't been by lately to see if the paving was done, but I know that that road was looking kind of tired. Yeah. Dave?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Beamish. So the couple progress things on it. One, we're the contractor's been in there to prep for paving. So we had 2 trenches down there, the sanitary and the water, and just timing wise, they haven't been able to get it in there to pave. However, they have replaced some of the curbing that was disturbed during construction, and it's going to look a lot better than it did before. And they are working on scheduling the base lift of asphalt as soon as the weather cooperates. They, as well as dry weather, they also need a certain temperature that is increasing, so they can't be paving in cold weather. The actual lift station itself has had COVID delays as well, and sent schedules out the window. And I believe that the contractor is back on site in February to complete that, the actual infrastructure inside the wet well. And until that time, we have a temporary pump that can be brought into use in the event of a pump failure in the wet well, which is what the manager of maintenance and operations and I were both concerned about. So we've got that. We can rest relatively easily and then hopefully see this project completed before the summer season.
Do we own that temporary pump? It's quite a large piece of equipment. Is that ours, or are we actually renting it? Is there?
It's being rented.
Okay, that's an additional cost of the project, I assume.
Correct.
Yeah.
And sorry if I can jump in here, Mr. Mayor, that is the delay, because of the delay that pump was required because of the COVID delay, and that's what the COVID funding will be covering, so as not to add to the overall project cost from the town's perspective.
Okay. Good. Appreciate that. Thank you. Councillor Kroll?
Director of Finance. I'm assuming that the projected extension of the pump rental cost was funds that were applied for in the COVID relief funding. So it's sort of an in-out, we receive the money to cover the cost, or is this additional above and beyond that?
This funding is definitely COVID related, and we're going to be using this is going to be coming out of the overall 1.5 million COVID restart funding that we received, because it was specifically to address the operation impacts of COVID.
Just in follow-up, so it is funding we applied for in our grant application?
No, it's not a grant per se. This is the grant that we received, the 1.5 million that the province and the federal government and the BC government provided to municipalities back in November. This is the one that has the 7 categories, but really it is about, so we don't have to apply for it. We were given the 1.5 million. We do have to report on it. And in the fall, council approved just under 400,000 for various items. This is the start of the new ongoing items that we're seeing in 2021 that are applicable to this grant. So we're going to be drawing down that $1.5 million gradually. There's no application to be made because we already have it, but we do have to account for it. And we identify which costs meet the criteria, and this is one of them. Does that help? Does that clarify?
Okay.
There's so many grants, and there's so many COVID grants right now going around. It's hard to distinguish, but this is the $1.5 million grant that we received.
Okay, well, I appreciate the clarification because I sort of assumed that we had applied for funding related to COVID expenses, and of that application, we'd received 1.5 million, which is the way a lot of them seem to work. Is you say this is what it's costing us or projected to cost us, and then they deem how much you're going to get of that. So we just got the 1.5 without having to clarify upfront what we were projecting in COVID-related expenses.
That's right. It was quite unique. I mean, usually you're right, we do have to apply, but really the province and the federal government was really responding to the local governments who were really struggling with cash flow and all of these unexpected costs or significant drops in revenue that some local governments have seen. And they did a review on their end and basically made a decision to allocate funding out to local governments as quickly as possible. And like I mentioned, although there are 7 criteria that we do have to report on, and you'll see it on our financial statements, the 2020 financial statements as a beginning, they made it, they lessened the burden in terms of making us the administrative burden. They just said, here's your money. As long as it fits in these categories, you choose that, make sure that they're applicable, and then we just report on the spending that we did. Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's quite amazing, really.
Thank you.
If council has a chance, the ministry website does have a very interesting FAQ document around those funds, as well as a copy of the transmittal letter, both to the municipalities and to regional districts. So you see the difference between those letters as well. This is still a little bit of a contention there. One more question I have, and that is regarding training and certification of operators. Are we able, in this time of COVID, able to maintain our training and certification of operators?
So the one thing that we were able to do is that online Zoom kind of training as soon as COVID hit in March. I think in April and May, we had the 2 separate online courses with companies that are certified themselves, accredited, I guess, to give the courses. And following that, our operators went to the District of Sechelt to organize the series of exams for their operators and some of the regional district operators and our operators. So we sent, I think, 6 people to those. Yeah.
Good. That's good, because you don't want people to fall behind in those areas. And
yeah.
Excellent. Good. Okay, Councillor Ladwick.
This isn't a comment about any one report in particular, but when the Director of Finance does come back to report to us in February, I'm still looking, I would really like it if as part of our reporting mechanism for our financial planning, if we could roll up the municipal expenses that a typical household would incur throughout this 5-year plan. And the reason I say that is because I just think it's good for us to be conscious of what municipal costs a residence is having to pay. Like take my rental property, for example, on a property that's assessed value isn't much more than $500,000. I'm paying roughly just over $400 a month in taxes and municipal or utility expenses. And so I know we're only saying it's $40 a year for water and $30 a year for sewer, but I think if we could, and show a projection of the typical house value or the rate of increase in properties over time and what we expect them to pay per month in all these expenses added up, I think would be a good thing for us to be aware of. Not saying that I would change or not support what we're doing, because I really do. I think it's important for us to be fiscally responsible, but at the same time, we need to be aware of, death by 1,000 cuts, as they say, and to be conscious of that.
Yeah, we do that for property taxation, and so we should do the same thing for other services and charges.
Yeah, like I'd like to show by 2026, what will an average house in Gibsons pay for taxes and utilities?
Okay. Do you understand that, Director of Finance?
I do. Thank you. Thank you for that suggestion. And what I could do for next year's the long-term financial plan, I could create a slide for that for each of them. We, like the mayor had said, we do that for taxation. So, here's an average household. From a utility point of view, assessment doesn't come into play. It's more flat tax and user fee. So I'll definitely give that some thought and see what I can come up with for when we present this in February for as a preliminary to the rates, fees, and charges bylaw readings. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And if it could be rolled up as one expense, not separate, like just let's see the full cost to an
So
individual.
water, sewer, and taxes all in one go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And one dog? No cats? Okay. Okay, well, thank you for that. And we'll move on then. And the next presentation are going to be the capital plans, I call. So we'll move over to the Director of Infrastructure Services. And thank again, Director of Finance and staff for putting all that material together for us. It's very helpful to have that in advance of seeing the bylaw later on. We know what's coming. So 3.4, Director of Infrastructure Services, 2021-25 water and sewer 5-year capital plans. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I've got my larger screen behind me, so I'm going to be looking like I'm looking over your head while I'm providing this information to you. For starters, is that from your end, is that fairly legible? Can you read the projects?
I can, yeah.
All good? Okay, good enough. I'm just going to go through 2021 and a little bit more detail, not too much, but and then we'll go to the 5-year. So first one, the Zone 3 booster station and chlorinator, that's just finishing up some minor remaining items, nothing major there at all. We've already talked about the Zone 3 well 6 pump that's going to be going down on Ocean Mount. The residents in that area, they saw the drilling rig, of course, and we did do some advance notification to them, and we'll do the same again when we're allowed to construct and connect this well. They will have a building there that will, small building that will house the pump equipment and the chlorinator and so on, the emergency chlorinator. But we're making that look as, without going overboard, a little bit more residential in appearance. Reservoir condition assessments is just looking at our 2 reservoirs and making sure that they are performing as they should, and to give us any idea on work that needs to be completed in the future. Trench shoring is simply that, just some equipment for the Public Works Department to be safely working those. 4 projects are carryovers, and with the exception of the well 6 pump, are more than likely to be completed before you actually finish the budget process for this year, largely because they're already underway. The Creekside water main and PRV, this is in relation to the Zone 3 separation. We were anticipating a pressure increase and calculate what that increase was, and it was close to what was expected. However, with aging water mains, we would prefer the pressure to be down further than it is, and we did allow for that in our estimation of the project in the first thing. And so this is reinstating a PRV, a pressure reduction valve, that was installed years ago, and putting a small section of water main in to change the boundary between Zone 3 and Zone 2. And so the boundary will be shifted up so that a few more people on in that neighborhood will be receiving Zone 2 water. McCall is a water main that has caused us some concern, mainly Public Works and in turn Infrastructure Services in general. It's an aging water main and has had a number of leaks. And when we were doing water meter replacements a number of years ago, there was a large number of galvanized services in that area as well. So this one's one of our more critical as far as condition goes to address. And so phase 1 will be from Jack's Lane down to Beach. And then the area from Beach to Bells is proposed to be done next year. And part of the reason for spreading it over 2 years, one is cost, and two is the second phase is a little bit more involved because we're also going to be dealing with some drainage issues and more grading, little paving on one corner. So there's a bit of a cascade effect in the other budgets. And so just looking at our workload is why that's been split into 2 years, and I say as well as the finances. The meter management, the director of finance was talking about the type of meter registers that we have, and some of them are touchpad, which means that somebody goes by your house and physically uses this little wand, we call it, and touches it on the pad on top of the meter, and that downloads the reading. The more recent, newer meter registers have quite a neat function on them, in that we can, if a resident called and was concerned about their water usage, I believe it's up to 3 months of data that gets stored, and we can download it and make up to hourly graphs for people so that if they had a high water use, they can see when that was occurring on such and such a day or such and such a time. And that's proved to be a very valuable tool in our tool belt to be able to share with people. And in many instances, they can identify it as irrigation or what have you. And we, this budget particularly is for replacing some of our older meters with this new technology, but also it's replacing some of the older registers with this new technology to provide that additional service for the public, as well as being reducing amount of staff time necessary for reading. The school road VFD, that's variable frequency drive, and that allows us better control of the school road pumps. And this is to provide us with better control for the largely to do with the Zone 3. And the variable frequency drive, if you can imagine it almost like a volume control or an accelerator, as to just an on-off switch. We can vary how fast the pump comes on and what volume of water it pumps. So it gives us a lot more control. Well, one vending machine probably needs no explanation. I believe that is either on order or is planned to be ordered in the fairly near future for installation down at well 1. The aquifer mapping update is, so we had our 2009 to 2013 aquifer mapping study, and this update is to bring in a lot of the information that we've gathered since then, including well logs from various DPA 9 permits, wherever anyone's poked a hole in Gibsons, we gather that information and it gets put into the water model by Waterline. They're also going to be updating any projections that they had, reviewing the climate data to make sure that we're being conservative with our planned water use. And we'll also be providing us with a list of new recommendations based on what we've learned about the aquifer to date. Some of that information will go into the planned update for DPA 9. Cross-connection control management. So as you probably aware, every property in the town has some form of cross-connection control, and that's to stop water backflowing into the town system. And that's part of our multi-barrier approach to protecting our untreated drinking water. And this is for some two of the larger chambers that house those valves to put drains in them to ensure that we make sure that we're taking care of those valves and keeping them out of groundwater. Well 3 pump house improvements. So well 3 is down in Dougal Park, and we've got a fairly large pump house down there because it used to house a generator, a backup generator, and that generator is now located outside with a newer, more compact design. And well 3 also houses our emergency chlorinator, or our backup chlorinators. And so mixing chlorine and electrical components isn't advisable because chlorine is corrosive. In addition, we are planning on putting a VFD, that variable frequency drive, down there to operate that well as well. And so there's some design work that needs to be done ahead of the actual work. And I believe we've got the actual work slated for 2022. The OCP update, DPA 9, that's for one of the 2 tasks for that I identified for the DPA 9 update. And as mentioned, the aquifer mapping update will provide the remaining information, so that OCP update will be able to be done this year. So that's it for this year. Maybe, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you wanted me to field questions at this point, or whether you just like to see what's coming on in the next 5 years first.
No, I think we should talk about this table here right now, just to answer any questions. Councilors, do you have any questions on this table? Any information? Okay, yeah, no, I've got some around sanitary, but not on this one. Okay.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you.
I
Proceed.
believe,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, carry on.
Okay. You're familiar, I forgot to just give you the general overview. You recall that you've got your strategic plan objectives up there, and we've identified which category each program or each project falls under. Further down, you've got the totals that you can see where you're allocating funds from in your various objectives. And then Director of Finance, I believe this was the table that I'm not sure if you want to speak to that at all, the funding summary.
Thanks, Dave. That actually.
Not the one you wanted?
Not really.
Okay, no problem. I will move on. Okay, so the top ones, this is the 5 years sheet. We've just gone through 2021. I'll just touch on these ones. We've got another water main, oops, sorry. I got another water main here on ABS that again is a bit problematic. Actually, it's more the services that are problematic. They're copper services, and the soil, for whatever reason, is a little bit more corrosive in that area. So we get a lot of service breaks on ABS Road. So our plan is to address that by replacing the services before the main itself. We've got a water main on Georgia and on Venture. that we're looking at upgrading, and that's just part of our regular cycle of proactive water main replacements. We spend kind of in the vicinity of $350,000 to $400,000 a year on our water mains, which is on par with what we should be in order to replace some of our aging infrastructure. And I feel quite positive about where we're at with that. We have done a number of mains over the years, and we will be doing an assessment on that in the not too distant future to see the effects of the change in Zone 3, as well as the effects of our water main replacements. As mentioned, there's the pump house construction for well 3 improvements. Windroad PRV is slated for next year as well, and that is tied to the Eagleview development. It's not required specifically for the development itself. However, they are bringing down looping a water main that is required of them, and then it will be feeding into the chamber for the PRV, and then the town will be paying for the PRV itself. We carry on with regular meter management and water main replacements. In some instances, we have not identified which mains are to be replaced. And that's because we try and coincide that work with other work that may have come up, or with developments where we can get the most bang for our buck on pavement, or on possibly work that they are required to do, and just look for efficiencies wherever we can. That's probably all I really want to draw your attention to on this. We've got a fairly big spike in 2021, largely because of the Zone 3 well pump, which is almost $800,000, and then we drop down to a more typical year for infrastructure. So happy to take any questions if you have any for 22 to 2025.
Dave, it's Lorraine here. Can I clarify the table that I was thinking that council may appreciate seeing? It's row 41 there. So just go down the sheet a little bit. Yeah, so that section there, the highlighted, you can see 2021 through 2025. Each column represents the funding sources for the annual capital project. So you can just have a quick glance of where the money's coming from. That might hopefully be helpful for you as a bit of a snapshot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Council, do you have any questions on this portion of the 5-year financial plan for water? Councillor Ladwig?
Thanks, Director of Infrastructure. This is actually a question regarding the last table that the Director of Finance just pointed out to us. Just out of curiosity, on DCCs, the 157,000, which project is that coming from, or anticipated to come from? I'm assuming that must be anticipated from a particular project.
Dave, that's 2023.
The 2023, okay, that's the expenditures from the DCC fund. Yep. And so let's see what we got here. That is water main replacement. And so it's an expenditure from the DCC fund, not a receipt from a developer.
Thank you for clarifying that.
We tend to stay fairly conservative with what our projections are for DCCs coming in. Even if a project looks like it's a slam dunk, sometimes we see things delayed, and we don't want to be counting on those funds before we should be. And so, as I say, fairly conservative on what we allow for.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, seeing none, please carry on, Director.
Okay, on to, this is a bit shorter, on to the 2021 sanitary. We've already talked about the Prowse Road lift station. so I won't go into that again. The wastewater treatment plant, you can see we only have $15,000 left on that. So it's just some minor deficiencies and record drawings and manuals, I think, that need to come in. So that project is all but complete. We've got some SCADA and hardware and data migration that is going to help us provide better analysis of the operations of the treatment plant, as well as some data collection improvements and operational improvements. I'm going to circle back to the manager of maintenance and operations to speak on those three, but before I do, I'll just mention these last two. Georgia low pressure. We had a homeowner or a property owner down on Georgia build a house, and there was no sanitary service down Georgia Drive. And so most of those homes were on or are on septic. And so they had to provide a sanitary service. We don't allow sanitary, or sorry, septic fields anymore, and it's doubtful actually whether they could build a septic field under current regulations. So in order to build the house, they built this infrastructure, and so that's goes halfway down the hill. We will be putting a latecomer agreement in place for them so that they are able to collect from people who connect to that sewer. But this budget is to complete that sewer down to the bottom of Georgia. We are also planning on replacing the water main coming up as well, and so this would tie in with that project. And then lastly, the sanitary service rehabilitation is an allowance to have a look at the service connections along North Fletcher. Those service connections tend to be one of the big culprits for I&I, which is inflow and infiltration, if you recall. And that's when stormwater is either infiltrating through cracks or inflowing into our sanitary sewer through direct connection. And sanitary services tend to be a common culprit. And so before doing any paving work, we want to go in there and if the sewer main doesn't need replacing, at least look at the sanitary services before we pave, and hopefully address some issues. We actually found a fair number on Gibsons Way when we were replacing or upgrading all the culverts up there. So it's well worth doing. Before I go on to the 5-year, more than happy to take any questions that you might have.
Yeah. Council questions for the 2021 project list? Dave, on the Prouse Road lift station, you may have said this and I was distracted for a minute. In terms of the pipe bursting you were doing, how did that work out? And do we have to, did it have any financial implication going forward?
I'm guessing a little bit at what you're referring to. So we did two things, or we have done one of two things planned. So one was to actually construct a section of force main that allows us to operate that bypass pump while we're upgrading the lift station. And so that's the new pipe that went from the wet well up Prouse Road and across Gower Point and connects back into the force main at the just across the intersection. Then we were looking at the possibility of pipe bursting for the remainder, and that's where access holes are dug every, I don't know how many meters they can do, and they run something up and they will burst the pipe, or they will line the pipe. In general, it's called trenchless technology, and it can certainly help in a lot of instances and be less expensive than digging an open trench. I haven't actually been involved in pipe bursting, and I'm very interested to see us get this done. What we're looking at is we have the design ready, and we're waiting until the Prowse Road lift station is completed, and then the remaining funds would be put towards that. But until we've completed the project, we didn't want to tender that because we didn't want to run short on the lift station itself. So we just felt that that was a prudent thing to do.
Thank you. Councillor Kroll.
And I think this, at the time when we applied for the AAP for the lift station, one of the things that was going to be done was testing of the pipe to determine the life expectancy of it. Now, does that fall under the pipe bursting, or was that separate?
It does. It was briefly exhilarating and then disappointing after that, because we really had no idea as to what condition the pipe was in. And we exposed it at the tie-in point, and it was solid as a rock, and you could hit it with a shovel, and it gave this ring of brand new pipe. But for some reason or other, as we got further and we started exposing some joints, we found that not all the joints, but a number of joints were starting to separate. And so we were seeing leakage around those joints. So although the pipe may have been in good condition, the joints aren't. And so, as I say, exhilaration, especially from the director of finance, she was doing a happy dance. But then, yeah, as I say, the joints proved to be faulty.
Other questions, Council? Councillor Kroll again?
So the issue with the joints, is this something that would be covered within the budget that we approved, or is this going to be a forthcoming additional expense?
This is so we're going to finish there should be a reasonable chunk left over from the 715,000 you see here from the Prowse Road lift station. And that would be put towards the force main rehabilitation. And once that project's completed, once the Prowse Road lift station is completed, if we determine that there are not actually enough funds to complete it in its entirety, we will be reporting back to council and discussing when you would want to budget for that, and then set the monies aside for the Prowse Road lift station for future pipelining.
Thank you. Okay. See no further questions. Please carry on. Sorry.
Yes, sorry, Mayor Beamish, to interrupt there. I was going to pass it over to Manager of Maintenance and Operations for the 3 items here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, if you recall, when we went on our visit shortly after you guys came on board at the wastewater treatment plant, there's a computer system that controls the operation of the various machines in the plant. And so that computerized system is called SCADA, and it's I won't tell you what the acronym is about, but so all the major components in that system, the controllers are aging. That was installed in 2004, so they are obsolete, and we're concerned with spare parts if they fail. So there's various phases to it. We've done phase 1 and 2 already, step 1 and 2, and there's 6 or 7 step. So this is for 3 and 4, and basically replacing old technology with new and improving our reliability, basically, redundancy. So the next one is for being able to collect from that SCADA system all the variables so that we can correlate them together and do investigative studies, when we're finding, for instance, that our water produced at the well does not quite match the water that we meter at the houses and the commerce we're trying to understand why that is the case, and having the data available so that you can export to Excel and then make graphs with that. And so that is just what that will help us do. We've already run into several instances where we don't know why all of a sudden, and you've seen this in our quarterly report sometime, we can't explain why all of a sudden the water consumption is high, and yet it doesn't match the production at the well, or vice versa. So this is tools basically. And the wastewater treatment plant operational improvements, the main one that will take the bulk of this funding is addition of polymer at the biosolids treatment, and this is to help us get a drier biosolids leaving the plant. So the drier it is, the less we have to pay in transportation, the less carbon footprint we produce, and all this, so it's improving the process basically. And those are the 3 items there.
Good. Yeah, I actually remember when that SCADA system was put in, and so if it's aging, I must be too. Hopefully that somebody's going to put me back together. We'll see. Any questions on those, Councillor Crowell?
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I suspect this would be for the manager of maintenance. I know there's a lot of growing concern about microplastics that end up in sewage from laundry and things like that. Do we have the capacity for removing them before we discharge?
No, unfortunately not. I think we would require like a third stage system like they have in sea shelf with a membrane. So you have a physical barrier to take that out. I guess that membrane can even take viruses out of the water, I understand. So we have very coarse screening at the end like that. We don't have that.
Is this something we should be looking at in our sort of long range planning, or better yet, even short range planning?
What I know of the district of Sea Shelf is that their membrane system is quite difficult to operate at the moment. It's costing them quite a large amount. It has to be backwashed continuously almost. I'm not saying that it's not possible, but it would require quite a bit of funding.
Councillor Crowell?
Is what Sea Shelf's using considered to be the best technology available for dealing with the problem, or is there other technology that is worth looking at?
I can't answer that. I don't know. How they selected this, and I would have to consult with my Metro Vancouver colleagues to see what they think, because they're building one right now in North Van, right? And I think probably the Capital Region plant is probably going to be that way as well, a third stage.
My concern is that more and more we're hearing about microplastics ending up in the food chain, and it just occurred to me it's something that we should perhaps be looking at. And sort of any information you could bring back to us and feedback on what systems are being used elsewhere, and I think because it's obviously it's not going to be cheap, but it's something that I think it's important that we, if we can, get a handle on.
Yeah, no, I can find out what's out there, the various options, and may not have the cost associated with them, but a relative comparison. I mean, which ones are more efficient, which ones are costlier. I will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Okay, seeing none, we can move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I just have a question for Councillor Ladwig. Just wondering what she was going to say.
Oh,
Uh,
did I miss the hint?
Yeah, that's totally fine, Mayor Beamish. It was just in follow-up to Councillor Kroll's comment about microplastics. I wholeheartedly agree. It is a huge issue. And as I think it is something that municipalities need to start talking about, no different than how we talk about solid waste management and what we're doing with biodegradables. I was just going to say that my understanding is that there's things that individual residences can put on their washing machines as filtration adapters to their actual washing machines. And so I'm just saying that maybe if we're exploring different tools and mechanisms, maybe that becomes something that we could promote and at least provide as part of our educational awareness about all these waste management issues, wastewater, waste management, whatever.
Good. Okay, thank you. And Dave, I'll turn over chairing of the meeting to you now.
I think it was just that her hand blended in with the ceiling color.
I didn't see it.
So, yeah. Okay. The 5-year plan. So most of what you're seeing, of course, is in 2021, 2022, and I've actually got oh yeah, there we go. The Gower Point low pressure. So that is also developer driven. There's a 6-lot subdivision opposite Franklin that's being planned, and they are required to put in a pressure system to service those homes, and this would be to extend it to the furthest most homes along Gower Point Road towards Gospel Rock. It would not be necessary for their development to do that, but we felt that it would be a good opportunity to, the equipment would already be mobilized, and we could extend that at the same time and provide service to those remaining properties. Outfall remediation is just that, looking at our sewer outfall and doing a bit of remediation on it to make sure that it's still functioning as it should. As the manager of maintenance and operations mentioned, there's step number 5 of the SCADA hardware and data migration, and for 2022. Shoreline trunk I&I remediation. We get I&I throughout our system, and a certain amount of I&I is expected. So I mentioned that's inflow and infiltration, and every drop of stormwater you get goes down to the plant. It has to be treated, and during high flows or high rain events, it can tax the system considerably. So that's on the uphill end of things. This is actually dealing with saltwater intrusion, which is corrosive, of course, as well as being more volume. And we determined that one leg of the shoreline trunk, one leg going away from, or I guess you just can't think of the orientation now, south of Browse Road, and the other one north. One leg has a higher salinity concentration, and so we know we're getting infiltration along there. So that's to address that issue. We got a fairly big ticket item coming up with a centrifuge replacement in 2023, and we are going to be looking at whether that can be upsized at the same time to deal with future growth. It's not particularly a surprise that the centrifuge would be require replacement sooner or later, and so it's not unexpected. Nor is it unexpected that we needed to increase the size. If you're only going to have a centrifuge, in this case, 16 to 20 years has a life expectancy, then you only deal with that 20-year growth that you need. You don't put in the biggest one that is meant to treat 30 or 40 years in the future. So there's a good chance that we may upsize that, but we are going to review that before we replace it, just to determine what the future needs are anticipated. RAS is return activated sludge, since you asked. And this is just a procedural or operational improvement to improve the biology and chemistry of the processes of the treatment plant. There's our number 6 for SCADA in 2023. And then we plan on doing a strategic plan update on our wastewater system. We've had it done before for our collection system. It's getting on in years as far as the plan goes. However, not a huge amount has changed in our collection system. And so putting it off till 2023, which is longer than you typically would take to, or a longer distance between updates than you typically use. However, this one we will also be rolling in, or we plan to roll in the treatment plant into that study as well. And 2023 will give us an opportunity to continue to make some of these operational improvements and that will help provide information to that strategic plan. And if anyone's keeping track, we have seen increases in costs for our treatment plant, but it is operating really, really well. We have some very dedicated staff on board, and Daniel's done a lot of work in getting the plant really running well, and has a good plan moving forward to continue to do that. And one of the things that we're both grateful for actually as well is that the number of after-alls call-outs, not just for the treatment plant, but also for the wells and so on, alarms through SCADA have dramatically dropped since, well, over the past 3 years. We've just seen a steady decline, and that is because of the work that staff are doing on our plant and our infrastructure. And so it's the after-hour calls are no longer the norm. And you know, as I say, I'm very grateful for that. And also it's indicative of the improvements that's being made to the various plants. So sliding down, well, actually, maybe I'll take any questions you have on that before I slide down to the funding table, if you have any.
Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, the funding table. Can I jump to that right now? Only because you just talked about the one project, the centrifuge, which appears to be funded through user fees, which appears to be a really big jump from the previous years. Like, does that mean like when we talk about user fees for sanitary, does that mean we expect like to increase the user fees by 4 times in 2023?
Short answer is no, but the Director of Finance would be able to give you a more comprehensive answer than that.
Yes, thanks, Dave. And so really that's the current years, but it's a partial effect of the rate increases that we've been putting in. And what happens is during the year, the rate increases accumulate, and we do tend to fluctuate in terms of how much we put towards capital every year from a taxation point of view, and the balance what we don't use goes into capital reserve. And so that year I would expect it'd be 0 going into capital reserve, and it would all be going towards that one project. That's a projection 3 years out. We'll see when we get there, and if not, it'll be from the partially funded from the capital reserve as well.
Thanks.
Okay, other questions, Council? See none. No, Councillor Crowell.
Thank you. Director Newman, you were mentioning the reduction in callouts. I'm assuming in your budgeting, you budget for a certain number of callouts, which I am assuming because they don't happen in regular hours, they would be staff responding to a call out would be at overtime rates.
That's correct.
So with the reductions, do you budget for a certain number of call outs and we save money if we don't incur them?
Again, I'm going to defer to the Director of Finance on that. However, one thing to mention is that the Director of Maintenance and Operations, as well as myself, I still got the name wrong. We are the ones that are on call and fielding those calls, and we get paid the same amount regardless of whether we answer that phone or not. In the interest of keeping costs down, we've volunteered out of the goodness of our heart to do that.
Thank you.
But the Director of Finance would be able to answer that question about overtime.
Thank you. Yeah, so we do budget as part of the wage allocations that we budget each year. The manager of maintenance operations does add in an estimated overtime budget that's included, and ideally we're on track for that. Sometimes we go over, sometimes we go under, but we do budget for a standard amount of overtime because these, call outs happen in every, not just water and sewer, but also general as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Further questions, Council? Seeing none, okay. Director, where do we go from here?
As far as I'm not seeing the Director of Finance come off mute,
Okay.
but unless the Director of Finance wants anything more from me, I believe the capital information we're done, and I don't have the agenda in front of me. I'm sorry. I've only got two screens, so I'm not sure what's next on the agenda.
Yeah. Director of Finance, we've got several longer pages, but I think they've all been covered.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so Dave just went through all of the sanitary and water 1 year and 5 year capital budget. So 3.4 is complete unless council has any more questions. And then that would be it for our presentations for this meeting today.
Oh, Council, do you have anything else? Any general questions about the operations and maintenance and things that are happening in water and sewer? No? Councilor Crowell, go ahead.
I just sort of going back to what Dan, the Director of Manager of Maintenance was saying with respect to the microplastics. Do we need to do anything in the way of, dare I say, requesting a report? But the whole issue with microplastics, I really think it is something we should follow up on. So I just don't know whether we have to make a motion that we do get follow up on it, or can we just leave it to Daniel's good nature that he will bring it back to us in the fullness of time?
CAO, what would you like to do with this?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think a motion is quite appropriate.
Okay.
And it could be a question of just reporting back. It's beyond our cost, so either way, we can easily find out a bit more and get a sense of what's involved in process-wise. Our plan is what it is, and sometimes you're able to add more, improvement to the system or not. So we can find out, but appreciate a motion from you, please. Thank you.
Possibly, if we do a motion, if we could kind of give it some sense of time frame that is not immediate, and maybe sometime, even if it is, I'll leave it to Councilor Crowe. I don't know how immediate.
I would just like to make a motion that as staff are reviewing new procedures and technologies in light of the microplastic issue, that they keep council abreast of technologies available. I certainly don't want them to drop what they're doing to make it a special report, but I think it's something that could be encompassed just in moving forward, that as new technology, that they're being made aware of it, that they just bring it to council's attention, and if it's possible to include, what we might be looking at in adapting it to our infrastructure and costs, that would be so much the better. But if we can keep it in broad strokes, just so it's on their radar moving forward.
Councillor Ladwig, did you have a thought on this?
Well, I was just wondering if this, I mean, I support what Councillor Kroll's his thinking on this. I'm wondering if it needs to be something that we couch under some of our strategic objectives for sustainability and climate change, and like in a bigger conversation. But I think the way the motion that Councillor Kroll just put forward is pretty harmless to put forward, and I think it's a good thing for us to be thinking about moving forward. And so from that sense, I'd support that.
CAO?
Certainly, and it's very much in line with what we've been doing with the plant all these years anyway. We've seen those improvements, and a lot of the improvements you're seeing is in the quality of the treatment of the water that goes out to the ocean. It's probably the best quality we've had over the years. The biosolids, which is a byproduct of that treatment, is now processed into a Class A treatment. So that's a good example. We didn't necessarily have those things even 5 or 6 years ago. So removing the plastics or looking at that. And I would add to that, Daniel briefly mentioned around viruses, and it's sort of their tertiary treatment that he's talking about is expensive, but it's one thing to say it's really expensive, is another thing to say this is what it looks like and how much it costs. So I think we can get a better sense of that and come back to that.
In corporate officer, do you have a sense of Councillor Kroll's resolution?
Motion.
Motion?
Yes, if you'd like to go ahead, we will record it.
Okay, I think he said it. Did you want to rephrase it, Councillor Kroll? Is it? Yeah.
If the corporate officer can
Pick up tapes.
happy with the gist of what I was requesting. I just don't want to make it too onerous for staff. I know they've got a huge workload on their plate, but I think I just wanted to make it that it stays on the record.
Yeah.
Maybe I can suggest something as I understood it. And so in essence, the motion would be that staff investigate options for removing microplastics from the treatment process, and as part of the work of continuously improving the plant.
And I don't know if we would want to take it to the point of, because I know in areas microplastics are showing up in communities' drinking water. So, it's what we're discharging, but I don't know what we're taking, are we getting microplastics showing up in our aquifer?
Mr. Newman?
The answer would be no on that one.
Okay.
And that's one of the added benefits of or added functions of the aquifer serves is filtration,
right?
As well as the storage. And if nothing else, I think the idea of tertiary treatment, yes, it is expensive. The other thought I had is I wasn't sure what sort of footprint that sort of equipment would take. But we can keep our ear to the ground and think about what options there are. And Councillor Ladwig mentioned the one, if tertiary treatment at the plant was not something that we had the means to do, or the space, or what have you, there may be other avenues. So I think it's worth at least looking at what the costs and ramifications are, and then you're better informed to make a decision.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a seconder. Councillor Ladwig, thank you. Okay, all further discussion of the motion? All those in favor? Thank you very much. That's approved. We have already adopted all the reports. We don't have an inquiry section on this agenda.
We do.
We do?
Item 4. inquiries?
Oh, we don't do inquiries on special council or special meetings, but since it's there, we will ask if anybody's there for inquiries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was because it's a special meeting, but it's budget that we had the inquiries there.
All right, appreciate that.
If we have anybody in the audience today who'd like to ask a question of council, if they could please use the raise the hand feature. We can turn on your audio and video. And I'm not seeing any, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, our next meeting is the regular committee of the whole, will be held on Tuesday, February 16th at 3 p.m. A motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Crowell, seconded by Councillor Lumley. All in favor of adjournment? Thank you very much. And that ends this meeting. So thank you, staff and everybody, for attending and participating. We will talk to you later. Have a good week. All right.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks.